My father, Edinburgh, was born December 16th, 1898, here in Richmond, Virginia. He's the youngest of 10 children, 9 surviving children. And being the baby, he was really spoiled by his siblings. He was an attorney here in Richmond, and quite a legal mind. An interesting fact, Virginia Union had a law school. My father and Spotswood Robinson III, the federal judge, his father, Spotswood Robinson Jr., and Daddy were in law school together. And in order to get their accreditation, someone had to take the bar. So they asked my dad if he would sit for the bar in his 3rd year. They had a 4-year program, but he had to promise to come back because they needed his tuition. This is right in the midst of World War I. He had a deferment. So he took the bar and he got the highest score in the state of all those that took the bar. They knew that that couldn't be right because no black man could do that. So they retested. They made him take the test again. And this time he got an even higher score. He was quite a legal mind and was often consulted on cases by Oliver Hill, Spotswood Robinson, Choke Lewis, Colston Lewis.
My mother was Faith Elizabeth Morris and Norrell.
My mother's birth date is February 15th, 1916. She's the baby of a Baptist minister. And his wife, Sadie Waterman, who was from South Carolina. My mother was born in Norfolk, Virginia, because my grandfather did move around a lot. Most of her siblings were born in different places.
He was pastor of Bank Street Baptist Church.
Yes, when she was born.
Yeah, when he was at Norfolk.
Okay. So, in addition to knowing our family history, we also have photographs. I don't know that a lot of families are so blessed. But this is a picture of my grandfather, Charles Satchel Morris, his wife Sadie, who had rheumatoid arthritis, and my mother never saw her mother walk. The oldest son, Charles Satchel Morris, who also was a junior, who also was an evangelist. The oldest daughter, Ruth, Esther, and then my mom is Faith. Their brother, Clarence, is also in this picture. So they all dedicated their lives to service, and especially in the ministry in some form or another. This is our mom. She was the baby of the family. My mother was quite the entertainer. She was a housewife for the first 10 years of their marriage. So when Sandra and Ed were born, our brother is 2.5 years older than my sister. He's named for my father, Edinburgh Aguinaldo Norrell Jr. My mom stayed home with both of them. And then she wanted to pledge a sorority. In order to do that, she went back to Union and got her teaching degree. And as she did that, she found out she was pregnant with me.
So she crossed the sands.
Yep. And then
she had the baby and she graduated.
Yeah.
And what organization was this?
Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated.
And to show you how our family is a family of minds that they do what they want to do. I am Alpha Kappa Alphas. So, how are you? And how did that happen? I didn't follow my mom, but my mom's best friend was eventually international president of Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority. And she said she was going to get one of us. That was Faith's godmother, but she was going to get one of us in the sorority. And it didn't hurt that when my husband and I bought our house in Washington, we lived across the street from Norma Boyd, who was one of the founders of AKA. So I used to be over there quite a bit.
My fondest memory of living in Richmond and growing up was our family time together. I would love when my sister and brother would come in town. I was an only child, and during most of the year. And then they had gone to college when I was 4 and 6. So when they would come, the house would liven up with all these college co-eds coming into the house, and I was the baby. But it was so cool to be able to grow up in a city where we were so well known. It was a little bit of a burden too. You had to be on your P's and Q's. We grew up in the North Side, which was such a wonderful, enriching neighborhood. Everybody knew everybody. We were very close. We were in and out of people's homes. We would visit friends. They called them pop calls. And I asked my mom one day, I said, how do you know who's going to stay home and be the receiver and who was going to do the visiting? But wherever we went, you just do a pop call. We might go visit an elderly woman.
Here for a minute,
yeah,
girls, we're just going in here for a minute.
And we would go visit someone elderly, and she would bring something to them, and then we'd go visit usually somebody that had children our ages. So that was our reward for being nice in the older woman's home. And they always pulled out refreshments. If we had any kind of meeting, it turned into full service. If you went to a meeting, my mother would say, what did they serve? Not that she wasn't really concerned about what happened at the meeting, but the first order of business was, what did they serve? She was a member of the Richmond chapter of the Links Incorporated. She was a member of Jack and Jill of America Incorporated. And then and as she retired, she became involved with the Richmond Symphony, a board member, and she was invited to join the Council of the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts. So she was a very active member of the Richmond community, always feeling the importance of giving back. So she was the life of the party, and she was also very giving and sharing of her time and talents.
And we in the family had a lot of traditions, and those traditions we follow today. To the day, Liza still has her traditions that she has to do for different holidays and other things that we have.
Before I was born, actually, y'all lived on Navy Hill. Mm-hmm. So Navy Hill was a neighborhood that was adjacent to Jackson Ward. Many people that had businesses in Jackson Ward lived in Navy Hill. Navy Hill was also connected to Jackson Ward, and it was the 95 freeway that separated the two neighborhoods. So growing up in the younger days, we could just go back and forth to 2nd Street. Mm-hmm. We'd go to Slaughter's.
Yeah, Daddy's office was on 2nd Street, and I was talking last night to some people that we used to have dinner on Sundays at Slaughter's.
My grandparents lived in 1015 North 7th Street, and from that house all the way up to my dad's house, y'all's house, which was at 903 North 7th Street, Norrell families lived, and we were in and out of each other's houses. In 1965-66, the city claimed eminent domain and obliterated Navy Hill and took with it all of that rich history. And many of the people that were long-term residents, including our aunt, Maddie, whom I call Nana, died shortly after. It was almost as though that plant had been ripped out and the roots were destroyed, and they just lost that sense of community because they were spread out so many different places that many of them just passed. And it was so much easier to, just take a neighborhood, not because of where it was a natural flow to have used the valley, Chaco Valley, which is where the railroad already transposed the area. But many of these neighborhoods were taken all over the country, and the main reason is to dilute the voting strength. Navy Hill, Jackson Ward had a solid black voting strength.
I moved back here after being away for so long. When I lived here, we lived in North Side, and we had all these friends, as Faithy said, and all the children, and they had clubs that we belonged to, and we just didn't see any reason for, or didn't know, or didn't have to know what was going on in the rest of whole Richmond. And we weren't deprived. We did not think we were deprived. We had a wonderful education growing up. And but my moving back here after being away for 64, 66 years, I now have found the second Richmond, which I didn't know anything about 60 years ago. And where I live now, the people that I talk to, you know, and that I have a relationship with in the building, all lived around that area, which is Monument Avenue. And I laugh and sit down sometimes and say, gee, can you believe I live on Monument Avenue now? And I mean, that was just unheard of for us at that time.
My grandfather's name was Albert von Norrell. His mother was Sarah Page Norrell, and his father was Moses Norrell. We don't know much at all about Moses. It's very hard to find records for him. We feel like he and Sarah were born on the same work camp somewhere maybe in Ashland or Hanover County. We do know that Sadie was one of the founders of Third Street Bethel Church. My grandfather was a true reformer, so they were responsible for establishing the first chartered bank in America, W. W. Brown and the True Reformers. My grandfather was also one of the 13 formerly enslaved men that purchased the Richmond Planet. The first editor was their cousin, Edward Archer, and then the second editor was the fiery John Mitchell. Eventually, after he died, his nephew took over, and then at the end of the Planet, the Norrell brothers, my dad and his brother Albert, and their older brother Moses, were really running the Planet. The period following the Civil War was called Reconstruction, and our grandfather, Albert Norrell, was one of the first graduates of the colored, and normal school then meant teaching school. So when he graduated at 16, he began teaching, even before there was a Richmond Public Schools. He taught for 66 years and was the beginning of what we later call the family business. So for 133 consecutive years, someone taught in Richmond Public Schools until I retired in 2017.
That was a direct descendant.
A direct descendant. I don't think any other family in the country has that much history in a public school system and that record of giving back to the community. Our cousin, George Peterson, was the long-term principal at Armstrong High School. My mother taught at Bellevue and George Mason. During desegregation, they selected some black teachers to move into the formerly white schools. So she taught for a little bit at Reed Elementary, which was then all white, and realized that just wasn't what she enjoyed about teaching. So she finished her career at George Mason. My principal, when I went to work at Fox Elementary School, was a man named Ron Herman. Ron had been in my mother's 4th grade class. He adored my mother and said that had it not been for her bringing him over on weekends to help her in the yard, and she didn't really need the help in the yard. She was just trying to expose these young boys, especially. She had a couple of young ladies that she helped, but especially young boys. To expose them so that she saw potential in them and she wanted them to see their full potential. Another student is attorney Joe Massey, who is also one of Ms. Norrell's boys. And he and his brothers fight about who Ms. Norrell loved the most. I was a teacher in Richmond Public Schools for 27 years. I was a kindergarten teacher, a 3rd grade teacher, and my last 14 years at Fox, I was the librarian, so I taught every student. And I had the pleasure of, I think probably one of the few schools in the city I would teach library skills and research skills and all the required curricula as a librarian in the first semester. And when we came back in second semester, it was right at Dr. King's birthday. So from January to the end of the school year, I taught Black history through literature. So students said that very often they had never heard or never had exposure to Black history except when they came to the library. Many of these are the direct descendants of Albert Norrell and were teachers in Richmond Public Schools at the school unveiling of the portrait of Albert Norrell. And this is Sandra with the big bow in her hair.
It happened that we talked about our cousin Rosalind, and Rosalind and I were the youngest grandchildren when the school was in the dedication of the school after our grandfather.
So Roz is 1 year older than I am, so she is actually born in this picture and I'm not. We have a strong faith in our family. Our grandfather being a Baptist minister, an evangelical, his two daughters, Ruth and Esther, also served as missionaries in Liberia. My mother's name is Faith. My name is Faith, and my daughter is named Faith Elizabeth. We do call her Liza, but we're 3 generations of the name Faith. So my sister, in her work, has even lived out her faith by being the first female athletic director at Howard University, but also being one of the founders of the Title IX. So she stepped out on faith, knowing that women needed the same opportunities in sports, and eventually Title IX covers everything that deals with women.
I put a crack in the ceiling because we were told that we had faith and we could do anything we were wanted to do. I had no idea this is what I was going to do. I knew it was something out there that I wanted to do, but I had no idea where it was going to lead me. And when I became, it has been now, the first and only female director of athletics at Howard University. When I finished Maggie Walker High School here in Richmond, Virginia, and then I went to Hampton, and it was Hampton Institute at that time. It's Hampton University now. And when I graduated, I was thinking that I was going to either be a teacher, or I was going to go to law school, or I was going to go to medical school. It was just by faith, again, that I got to D.C. The chairman of the Department of Physical Ed for Women at Howard University had heard about me, but I was one of few females that had their water safety instructor's certificate. And she was looking for someone to teach swimming in her department. And so she sent me a telegram and asked me to please come for an interview. And I did so. It was the weekend of the March on Washington. And I went to interview with her, and she hired me for a year at Howard. I went to Howard for a year, and I spent 43 years there, and I retired. And each job that I had at Howard, it was just going higher and higher and higher until there it was that I was going to be the director of athletics. I got my undergraduate degree from Hampton and a graduate degree from Howard. I went to Howard so young that they were not even taking out Social Security out of checks at that time. I did not realize what a significant part that these two institutions would play in my life until I got older. And then I realized that there's so much history in both of the universities.
I went to Hampton. I was only there for a year and a half. And then eventually I wound up at Howard. And when I got there, people said, "Oh, are you related to Miss Norrell, the swimming teacher?" Because Howard required that every student take swimming, Hampton and Howard, because so often Black people had not been exposed to swimming. So when they asked, was I your sister, they would often say, so eventually no, I've heard of her, but no, we're not related. But so many students have come up to you, especially in athletics.
It was just seeing somebody, particularly with the women, somebody their color in a position of this, and I had just so many mentees that I just didn't, realize that I was at that time playing such a significant role in their lives, and I still hear from them. Run into them. I was in South Africa and I ran into couple of the fellows that were over there swimming. Some of the athletes have gone pro and they've invited me to come back to their games. And it's just been an eye-opener all through my 43 years there.
Legacy for me means ancestors. To whom much is given, much is expected. So we have such a rich legacy of service and commitment to community, education, participation, always thinking of other people and always trying to lift as we grow. So legacy, we inherited a lot of legacy through our parents and our ancestors' involvement. And so I feel legacy is to continue what they did, to let people know their stories, and then to create my own by remembering the children that I've served in Richmond Public Schools. I'm an artist, so hopefully my art will be enjoyed
A very good artist too.
by people in the future. And then, of course, my children are my legacy. I call them the miracles. I had my son at 40, Mick, after the doctor told me I only had a 10% chance of having a baby. I had Liza 5.5 years later. I delivered her at 46 because she's born 9 days after my birthday. So I turned 46 and then delivered her. So I call them the miracles.
And I call them my children, but that Faithy carried them.
So we have raised them to speak on their great-great-grandmother, Maggie Walker, and their great-great-grandfather, Albert Norrell, and their accomplishments, so that they are very confident in the knowledge of their family history, but they're also confident in other causes. My son has gotten involved with bringing the arts to public school students in New York City. My daughter speaks on the ERA, the importance of the Equal Rights Amendment. So she speaks on lots of social causes.
And Mick is also involved in his alma mater, William and Mary, and that he's on a junior board for William and Mary.
I went to St. Catherine's. She serves on the alumni board. Very few blacks are on that board. So yeah, both children have really understood the importance of attaining a legacy and moving it forward with their actions.